We saw already how Tarquinius Superbus intimidated the Latins into submitting to Roman power when he framed and executed Turnus Herdonius. Now we're going to see how he completes the war against Gabii, another nearby town. However lawless and tyrannical Tarquin may have been as monarch in his own country, as a war leader he did fine work. Indeed, his fame as a soldier might have equaled that of his predecessors, had not his degeneracy and other things obscured its luster. It was Tarquin who began the long 200 years of war with the Volscians. From them he took by storm the town of Suessa Pometia, where the sale of captured material realized 40 talents of silver. Talents are a measure of precious metals by weight. They vary from time to time and place to place, but one talent is roughly 70 pounds for the Romans. So that is quite a lot of silver. This sum he allocated to the building of the Temple of Jupiter, which he had conceived on a magnificent scale worthy of king of gods and of men, of the might of Rome, and of the majesty of the place where it was to stand. He was next engaged in hostilities with the neighboring town of Gabii. This time progress was slower than he expected. His assault proved abortive. The subsequent siege operations failed, and he was forced to retire. So he finally had recourse to the un-Roman and disgraceful method of deceit and treachery. Notice, of course, that whenever the Romans do something like this, whenever they are deceitful, it is, of course, an un-Roman thing to do. Pretending to have abandoned hostilities in order to devote himself to laying the foundations of the Temple of Jupiter and to various other improvements in the city, he arranged for Sextus, the youngest of his 3 sons, to go to Gabii in the assumed character of a fugitive from the intolerable cruelty of his father. On his arrival in the town, Sextus began to pour out his complaints. Tarquin, he declared, had ceased to persecute strangers and was now turning his lust for dominion against his own family. He had too many children and was heartily sick of them. His one desire was to leave no descendants, no heir to his throne, and before long was likely to repeat in his own home what he had already done in the Senate, and leave it a desert and a solitude. I myself, he continued, escaped with my life through the bristling weapons of my father's guard, and I knew that nowhere but in the home of the tyrant's enemies should I be able to find safety. Make no mistake, the suspension of hostilities is a feint only. War still awaits you, and as soon as he thinks fit, Tarquin will attack you unawares. You have no room in Gabii for suppliants? Very well, then, I will try my luck through the whole of Latium. I will visit in turn Volscians, Aequians, Hernicans, seeking and seeking until I find some friend who knows how to protect a son from a father's impious savagery. Who knows, but I may find, too, some spark of true manhood, some readiness to take up arms against the proudest of kings and the most insolent of peoples. The men of Gabii gave Sextus a friendly welcome, knowing as they did that any show of indifference would provoke him to leave the town at once. In their view, they declared, there was no cause for surprise that Tarquin should be treating his own children as brutally as he had treated first the Romans and then his allies. Brutality was his nature, and for lack of other objects, he would end by exercising it against himself. For their part, they were glad Sextus had come, and it would not be long before, with him to help them, the scene of battle would shift from the gates of Gabii to the walls of Rome. Sextus was soon admitted to the councils of state, where he made it his business to express agreement on all matters of local politics which the men of Gabii might be expected to understand better than himself. On one issue, however, war with Rome, he took the lead. The advisability of this he urged repeatedly, pointing out that he was specially competent to do so because of his knowledge of the resources of both parties, and of his certainty that Tarquin, whose arrogance even his own children found insufferable, had brought upon himself the hatred of all of his subjects. Sextus's words gradually took effect, and leading men in Gabii were soon in favor of reopening hostilities. Sextus himself, meanwhile, with small bodies of picked troops, began a series of raids on Roman territory. Everything he said or did was so nicely calculated to deceive that confidence in him grew and grew until he was finally appointed commander of the armed forces. War was declared. Minor engagements took place, nearly always to the advantage of Gabii. Of what was really happening, nobody had the smallest suspicion, and the result of these apparent successes was that everyone in Gabii, from the highest to the lowest, was soon convinced that Sextus had been sent from heaven to lead them to victory. The common soldiers, too, finding him ready to share their dangers and hardships and generous in distributing plunder, came to love him with such devotion that his influence in Gabii was as great as his father's was in Rome. At last he was to feel that he had the town, as it were, in his pocket, and was ready for anything. Accordingly, he sent a confidential messenger to Rome to ask his father what step he should next take, his power in Gabii being, by God's grace, by this time absolute. Tarquin, I suppose, was not sure of the messenger's good faith. In any case, he said not a word in reply to his question, but with a thoughtful air went out into the garden. The man followed him, and Tarquin, strolling up and down in silence, began knocking off poppy heads with his stick. The messenger at last wearied of putting his question and waiting for the reply, so he returned to Gabii, supposing his mission to have failed. He told Sextus what he had said and what he had seen his father do. The king, he declared, whether from anger or hatred, or natural arrogance, had not uttered a single word. Sextus realized that though his father had not spoken, he had, by his action, indirectly expressed his meaning clearly enough. So he proceeded at once to act upon his murderous instructions. All the influential men in Gabii were got rid of, some being brought to public trial, others executed for no better reason than they were generally disliked. Many were openly put to death, some against whom any charge would be inconvenient to attempt to prove were secretly assassinated. A few were either allowed or forced to leave the country, and their property was confiscated, as in the case of those who had been executed. The confiscations enriched the more fortunate, those namely to whom Sextus chose to be generous, with the result that in the sweetness of personal gain, public calamity was forgotten, until, at long last, the whole community, such as it now remained, with none to advise it or help it, passed without a struggle into Tarquin's hands. Tarquin's next move was to make peace with the Aequians and to renew his treaty with Etruria. This done, he turned his attention to home affairs. His first concern was the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline, which he hoped to leave as a memorial of the royal house of the Tarquins, of the father who had made the vow, and of the son who had fulfilled it. It was his wish that the whole area of the temple should be sacred to no god but Jupiter, so in order to clear it of other religious associations, he proposed to exaugurate or secularize a number of places of worship, some containing sacred buildings, others an altar only, which had been originally vowed by King Tatius at the crisis of his battle with Romulus and subsequently consecrated with proper ceremonies. The new work was hardly begun when, we are told, heaven itself was moved to give a sign of the future greatness of Rome's dominion. For when the auguries were taken, the birds allowed the secularization of all the places of worship except the shrine of Terminus. Terminus is the god of boundaries. The fact that of all gods Terminus alone was not moved from his place or called to leave the ground which was consecrated to his worship was taken to portend the stability and permanence of everything Roman. Hard upon this happy augury came another strange event, which seemed to foretell the grandeur of our empire. A man's head, with the features intact, was discovered by workmen who were digging the foundations of the temple. This meant, without any doubt, on this spot would stand the imperial citadel of the capital city of the world. Nothing could be plainer, and such was the interpretation put upon the discovery not only by the Roman soothsayers, but also by those who were specially brought from Etruria for consultation. This is a particularly funny story because they find a head, and in some versions this is actually where the name of the Capitoline hill comes from, because in caput you can recognize caput capitis, the word for head. If you decapitate someone, you remove the head. And perhaps the ol part is either the name of the fellow, it could be the caput olii, the head of some dude named Oli, or you could take it as just a noun forming suffix. I like to go with the version where it's Olius's or Oli's head that they find there. At any rate, it's a very clear omen. Definitely means Rome is marked out to rule the world.